Good evening, everybody. I mean, we've had some scenic views in pre-season, particularly on these video verdicts. We had Kaiserslautern and the epic stadium that was. We had the beautiful mountains in Austria. They don't get any more scenic than a backdrop of Carrow Road, do they? Lovely to be back here this afternoon for Norwich City's final pre-season friendly against the most successful side in Greek football history, Olympiacos. And Norwich City have ensured that they have finished their warm-up campaigns, their championship preparations unbeaten. They've won here by 2-0, another clean sheet. That means they've only conceded 3 goals throughout the entirety of this pre-season campaign, and 2 of those came in the opening 2 friendlies against Barnet and Kings Lynn. So from David Wagner's perspective, I'm sure he will have learnt a lot. He will have seen a lot, good and bad, and we saw a lot of that good and bad today. And now we can focus on the real stuff. And of course, everyone will debate and dispute how much you can take from pre-season, how much you can actually, in terms of meaningfulness, is that a word, meaningfulness? That is a word. It's been a long day. How much you can extract from it in that regard. Probably looking for performances over results. And I think we have seen trends throughout pre-season. I've spoken about this a lot. Norwich definitely looking defensively more robust, more resilient. We saw it again today. Angus Gunn, there was one shot from Masuras which forced him kind of to scramble just to his right-hand side as it was, took a slight nick off Omar Mamadeli. There was one that crashed against the side netting in the second half as well. But beyond that, Norwich were pretty good in terms of the way they protected their own goal, a few cheap turnovers. But yeah, ultimately this was a performance that had, I'm just trying to get comfy on the steps, there we go, that had some promise, had some bits, I think, which will continue into the season when it goes off to kind of question marks and asking questions. So yeah, I think that has been a theme that we've seen throughout pre-season. Norwich looking better, more organised, better structured against the ball, protecting their goalkeepers a lot more. I think it felt last season that their goalkeepers were exposed a lot to chances and a regular host of chances. And that doesn't feel like it will be the case this season. I think Shane Duffy has added a real grit and a real bit of experience to that back line. He guides them. But I think equally, and again, I've said this throughout pre-season, there's much more communication now and much more talking and much more sort of busyness about them on the pitch in terms of cajoling players to get into positions, organisation. Their distances are pretty good, apart from when they get turned over in transition at points, and there's a little bit of a gap between the midfield and the defence. So that's one to watch with caution, I guess. But yeah, I think this kind of encapsulated everything that Norwich have been over the pre-season. And it's really interesting because for the bulk of it, and I think it's become blindingly obvious really, that David Wagner wants to play a 4-4-2 at Norwich, as has been his sort of preferred formation throughout his career. That midfield double pivot, which is why Norwich aren't going to sign a defensive midfielder, which we've spoken about until the cows come home. And actually that 4-4-2, I think, against the ball gives them all of those good qualities that we spoke about, gives them that structure and defensive solidity, which is going to be really important in the Championship if they can take it into the season. But then against when they're on the ball, I think it does create some question marks because this doesn't feel like it's quite fluid enough yet. There was one really good spell, I think in and around 32 minutes, Gabriel Sara at the heart of it, where they zipped the ball around really nicely. And it was probably the first time I've sat back and go, oh, okay, that's a really nice bit of play on the ball. But by and large, I don't think this formation gives them the best fluidity and flexibility when it comes to the way they want to structure their attacking play. And that's been a point that I've made throughout the entirety of pre-season. And actually what we saw today, and it's been a big question, I think I mentioned it in Kufstein, actually, in terms of how Norwich are going to play against teams that low block, that come here to defend. And actually we got a glimpse of that today. There were moments, particularly in the first half, where their central defenders were almost rolling the studs across the top of the ball, patiently waiting. And it felt like a bit like throwing a fishing rod into the sea and just waiting for a nibble, waiting for a team to go and press them, to create transitional opportunities and to create space that they can exploit into. And that is why there's been this emphasis on fitness and running that you will have heard David Wagner speak about, because that's what they want to create. They want to create those moments, almost sort of like counter-attacks, almost like fake counters, and essentially those transitional moments where you can get players into spaces, and that is when you're then relying on your system to create moments and opportunities. They push the fullback so far on so they can create overloads down the sides, and then it's about the quality of the delivery, which is why someone like Jack Stacey has been identified, because of his ability to whip crosses into the box. And you look actually at the goals that Norwich City scored today, one shot from range, which again came from a turnover and Norwich overloading. Really clever pass from Barnes Hernandez, then put that right across the face of goal. It comes out to Kenny McLean, who smashed it, got deflected. I feel maybe I'm being overly harsh on the goalkeeper, but I think he should have done better with that. And then the second one, a set piece, Gabriel Sara floats it in. Duffy goes up to contest the header. No foul there. The keeper's not strong enough, doesn't command the situation well enough. Duffy wins the header. Josh Sargent puts it in. So we've seen sources of goals here, but actually Norwich play like an away team is the best way that I can describe it. They don't necessarily want to have all of the possession. They relish on the game being quite open. They relish on there being spaces to exploit and run into, and that's why players like Onel Hernandez, John Rowe, even Josh Sargent I'd put into that mix, are going to be really pivotal this year because they have players with the potential to do that. So what happens when a team doesn't take that bait? It is a question that I think we need to see answered, but there are solutions to that in terms of how you can manufacture those transition opportunities. So that was interesting. That's an interesting development that we hadn't really seen. I thought if we break this game down in terms of time, I thought the first 15-20 minutes was quite lethargic. Norwich didn't really find their rhythm particularly well. They weren't using the ball very well. It was all a bit stodgy. That gap that we saw in midfield again in terms of their build-up began to appear. It's actually really interesting how they're trying to caveat that. You've got Ashley Barnes and Christian Fashnak coming a little bit deeper to almost, whereas last year we saw them create a 3-1-5 essentially. It was now a 3-1-2-3 with real width in it as well to try and stretch to create space in central areas. So that was interesting. But yeah, the first portion of the game wasn't necessarily great. I thought the second half of the first half, if you want to speak, was probably Norwich's best spell. They looked really good. They moved the ball better. They were cleaner in possession. They had that. Gabriel Sara was really ticking, and I think when he is in that form, he clipped a lovely ball over the top to Jack Stacey. There was a few other nice passes in there. You're going to find it very difficult for championship teams to contend with that level of quality, and there's going to be a big emphasis, I think, on Norwich City, particularly at this place. Breaking down defences will be down to how successful Gabriel Sara can do that, because he's some player when he gets going. And it's just going to be about keeping him fit, and maybe Marcelino Nunez you put into that category as well as being the solutions for those problems. But yeah, I felt Norwich pressed really well in those areas. They defend really well from the front now, which I think is an interesting point. We spoke so much about the defence, but actually the whole structure of it begins with the front two and the way they press and the way the whole team functions around that and exists around that, which again is why they've got two energetic central midfielders to go and support those phases. But you have to make sure you get your distances right when you do that, because if you press and it's disjointed, you gift it to the opposition then in terms of playing around you. So, for example, the game against Southampton away from home, I can see being really, really interesting and actually suiting Norwich, because you can have a team there that's going to be uber focused on keeping the ball. Norwich will be happy to absorb. There'll be space to go in the other way. That is the type of game scenario, I guess, game state that Norwich want to create, and that it feels like they're going to thrive in this season. So that was the second portion, and then you've got this weird final portion of the first half where they just had a lot of unforced errors. Yanulis gave the ball away, Duffy gave the ball away, but again, I think there's been a big emphasis when they give the ball away on recovery and how people respond and react, and last year we didn't see the reaction as well. And it feels like that's a bit better now, certainly from the basis of what we've seen, but ultimately it needs to be those unforced errors that are nipped in the bud. And actually, I think increasingly that left-back position could be one that gets targeted as the season goes on. We saw Shemiso Apoeta play there in midweek. We saw him come on and play there again. Yanulis positionally, very good in possession actually, very press-resistant as a footballer. Good options going forward, carries the ball pretty well, but has a knack of getting caught positionally, particularly with long balls over him. So I could see that becoming an issue potentially, but it's okay for now. The second half really... it was pretty competitive till 60 minutes. I thought Olympiacos came into it a bit better, but Norwich again created those transition opportunities, scored a goal for Josh Sargent where he looked quite a bit offside. I think it was Nunez who slipped the ball through to him. They then scored a second one. Ida flicked that on. Rowe ran on beyond it, and tucked the ball in. Both ruled offside, but two really cleverly crafted goals. Obviously, that's when the Sargent goal came from Shane Duffy from the free kick in that second half, and Norwich controlled it. And then about 60 minutes, to be honest, it descended into a classic pre-season friendly with both teams making lots of subs. So that was the tale of the game, to be honest. And I think, I get this question a lot on Q&As, and when I do match day blogs about how optimistic am I feeling about Norwich City. I've seen every game in pre-season, domestically and overseas as well, as you guys will know. And actually, I think in recent weeks I'm probably about where I was. But actually, in the last week or so, largely around that defensive improvement, I've seen some things that I wanted to see here today in terms of their work in possession and offensively. Not all of them. And I think there was still some ugly parts to that performance. As I said, I think the formation could potentially become a little bit of an issue, but Norwich have options to change that should they wish, if it functions in the way I fear it could and becomes quite clunky and quite stodgy. I feel slightly more optimistic now than I did a week ago, I would say. What that looks like in terms of tangible predictions, I don't know. I'll go away and have a think about it. But I think my fear was at the start of pre-season that we would get a Norwich team that still looked a bit hapless defensively. We still had a similar build-up structure and wasn't using the ball as well. And some of those things I still have and hold concerns about. But that defensive solidity, the way that they've shored themselves up, the way they've protected their goal, has offered, I think, a little room for encouragement. Of course, as much encouragement as you can take from pre-season. So I wouldn't say I'm massively enthusiastic about their hopes and their prospects ahead of the new season. I'm in the mood to be surprised, and I hope that's going to be the case when the real stuff gets going. But yeah, it's been a successful pre-season in that regard. As I said, only conceded 3 goals, unbeaten. Performances have been okay by and large. A few that have been pretty poor, but that's okay. Now we can all stop caveating everything. It's just pre-season and look ahead to the real stuff when Hull come here next weekend, because Norwich have to make a quick start. The pressure's going to be on quickly. And if they don't, then it could turn out ugly again. So it's going to be really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to the season ahead. I think that's where I'm going to leave this verdict. Now, no, I'm not. I'm going to speak actually about some of the new guys who are in and around it. Christian Fashnacht, I thought, had a quiet game. He was on the periphery for a lot of it. Understandable given his various flights. I mean, I had one this week and I feel absolutely exhausted. So goodness knows how he feels, having had quite a few to get visas and get various little bits done around this move. But yeah, I think you saw that and you felt it. It's probably why he played 45 minutes today. Ashley Barnes, I'm really enjoying, and probably more than I thought I would, because he's so clever and sly, and he's one of these players when he's on the team that you're rooting for or supporting, you really get behind him, because he wins free kicks cleverly. He's happy to stick up for teammates and himself. He's horrible, but nice horrible. And there are a couple of moments where he won some really helpful free kicks to relieve Norwich of pressure. And actually what he does is give Josh Sargent a lot of freedom to go and be kind of the centre point, to go and play on the shoulders, go and get in behind, dare I say, probably even to score goals. But the way he functions helps the team a lot, and that includes a lot of the defensive stuff he does, a lot of the communication that he's doing, the way he wins free kicks cleverly. Enjoying him. Jack Stacey is classy, I think is the best word to describe him. Shane Duffy had a bit of a mixed game. I think in possession he had some struggles at points, but by and large defended his box pretty well. He's solid. He's an absolute man-mountain of a bloke. And again, just someone who I think is going to be pretty dependable as the season goes on. I still want to see him tested in behind, particularly if Norwich go for him and Gibson as the defensive two next week. So, I'm emerging from pre-season with a bit more optimism than I had. I don't want to over-exaggerate how excited I am, because I'm not hugely excited, but I certainly feel more optimistic about their prospects than I did at the start of July and certainly in the last week or so. And now we can see how much of it was irrelevant and how much will translate into the championship season. So there we go, a 2-0 win over Olympiacos. Not to be sniffed at, a team that starts the Europa League campaign 5 days after Norwich play Hull. So even though their season doesn't start until later in August, it felt like a relatively good test, although they played Rangers in midweek, so they've had a lot of travel, and that probably felt like the game that they were focusing on a little bit more. So that's kind of where I am with it all. Let me know how you feel as well after pre-season. I'm always intrigued to hear your thoughts, and I do read the comments, so let me know. Looking ahead to a new season now. I'm very excited for the start of the season, and we can get into the real stuff and talk about the real stuff, which is good. Thank you very much for all of your support and for watching all of the verdicts and the podcast and all of the video content across pre-season. Of course, We have to say thank you to our sponsors, Carrow Healthcare, who have made all of it possible, made all of the trips abroad possible and whatnot. So we really appreciate their support. And of course, Binkham.com is the place to go. Consider taking out a subscription if you like. If you've enjoyed what you've seen over the first month or so, I think you can get a month's free trial to sample it. So that would be a good way to do it. Thank you very much for watching. From Carrow Road, we'll see you next week as the real stuff kicks off. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.